This is the Non-Tech Podcast, conversations about education, technology, and culture, with Dr. Doug Reed and Dr. Matt Stranick. Thank you for joining us.
My name is Dr. Doug Reed, and I am located on Abagway, the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people.
My name is Dr. Matthew Stranick, and I am on Treaty Number 8 territory, the traditional meeting grounds and gathering places of our First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples.
Hey everyone, Dr. Matt Stranick here with you for the latest in a two-peat of sorts on the topic of innovation with the inestimable Dr. Doug Reed, who is leading the charge, the innovative charge, as it were, not to be confused with the charges of sorts that are going on with the GIF, the Supercollider GIF that is behind me. I figured that was sort of from the CERN, as the European Supercollider machine that has a lot of mystique about it and has been sort of advancing our understanding of subatomic physics pretty far forward. That's kind of. Do you know anything about the Supercollider, Doug? Here's my opening gambit for you. Not even how you doing. We just recorded 10 minutes ago. I think you're doing okay. What do you know about the CERN? What do you know about the Supercollider? I got to know what you know, because I don't know much.
I know they normally call it CERN Supercollider, not CERN.
There we go. Are there other supercolliders out there?
That's the Large Hadron Supercollider. So and I understand some of the physics behind it or what they're trying to do when people really break it down to explain it to me, like I was a grade 9 student. But the math is beyond what I've taken. So that's what I got.
Samesies. Cool beans. We did just change our outfits, and I changed my background. So ostensibly, we are into a new episode. So We just had ourselves a really awesome talk, sort of focusing on the historical dimensions of innovation and how we consider that within the broader context, within historical sort of paradigm. Some of our lit went all the way back to the mid-1800s, okay, in that last one. So if somehow you haven't seen the preceding one, I do recommend you do so. Why don't you tell us a bit about the focus on the second half of this two-peat, my friend?
Okay, so on this Grey Cup Sunday, that the Grey Cup is actively being played right now, and the Toronto Argonauts are up on the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. For the people watching on video, I have a Argonauts hat because I love the logo. And I have not Winnipeg Blue Bomber gear, but I have my Calgary Stampeders gear that I'm wearing, even though Calgary was the worst team in the league by far. It was humbling.
CFL, giver on the CFL knowledge, my friend.
Yeah, and what we're going to talk about is innovation failure in EdTech. That's where we're going for this episode. That's what I want to talk about. After we had that very nice episode about here's innovation in education in general, let's dig in.
It shall be done, quite frankly. Yeah.
Yeah, so let's jump right in then. Let's jump in with a wild article from 1996, and it's about technology refusal, rationalizing the failures of student and beginning teachers to use computers, where they're just saying, no, we're not doing it. You can't make us. that's what the article is about. And I love the fact that it's written by somebody named Wild. And they had this great quote that I pulled out, this passage. Too often the assumption is made that student teachers and teachers need to know how to use the computer technology without first asking why they need to use it, and importantly, what they need to know. The why and the what are so utterly important, and that gets ignored in the big picture of ed tech, especially with the electronic versions of ed tech initiatives. And I just love the way they came to that point.
That really encapsulates what we've been after since the very beginning of this. If you're talking about things that just immediately land, 1996, I mean, that was the year that I graduated from high school. And if we're looking at sort of the internet existed, the internet was sort of there, definitely in the mid 1990s. We're looking at pretty robust forms of electronically supported learning technology, right? The ed tech field was pretty well underway at that point. And I just got to throw it back to you here, Doug. I don't necessarily, when I'm looking at the title for the show, innovation failure itself, I hadn't really considered that as a thing. I considered, failure of innovation, failure to innovate, lack of innovation, but just sort of putting it out as a single sort of, tie a ribbon around it, innovation failure. I actually think that phrasing on it, my friend, is somewhat, I dare say, innovative in and of itself. The way you're packaging the semantics, the way you're packaging the rhetorical function of this show. That's my opening gambit just as an English teacher. And then, 1996, a good year relative to being done with grade 12 once and for all. And the fact that, quite frankly, this is a Wild article by Wild, actually, on the basis of what you're sharing here, my friend. So that's all good. What else are you sort of thinking about it beyond what we've already kind of established as like we're an inquiry-driven show and we're all about the what and the why? I mean, we've been doing that since the get-go. So what else here landed for you?
So the first thing that landed is every time you give me a compliment, I'm going to shut up and take it. So thank you. that's where I'm going.
That's one of the things I'm here for, bro. I call it as I see it,
So in the mid 90s, because this is a 96 article, so I assume they did some writing in 95, maybe early 96, depending, maybe 94. I would not use robust as a word to describe electronic educational technology, or ICT, as they called it back then. Because I remember in 97, I remember in 1997, I had a dial-up modem, and to go from one website to the next website, I would click the button and I had a book and I'd read a page or two, and then the picture would pop up or the next website would pop up. If it was all text-based, it was quicker, but listen to that screechy bod noise, that noise.
Dial-up router noise.
That's it.
That's it. That's the instant nostalgia, the squeaky, which somehow we just took as a normal aspect of accessing the stuff, right?
Because we were so excited to have it. We were so excited to be able to have it at home or have it at school. Or I remember we got it at school and I was like, why? And somebody I was teaching with is like, oh, come look at this, come look at this. And it was set up in one of the vice principal's offices. I was like, what can we do with this? And then, of course, we started. It was like, okay, how is this going to help me? Right? Like, what?
You haven't stepped away from it since.
Basically. I figured some stuff out. But I love the concept of what are we doing? Why are we doing it? Rather than here's how to use the technology. It just doesn't make sense. It's like, if you want to teach me how to drive a submarine, okay, But if I don't own a submarine and I don't have access to a submarine outside of the lessons, what is the point here? What's going on here? Would it be cool? Yes. Do I want that responsibility? No. I need the other
Many are
basis.
called, few are chosen. That's kind of it right there. Yeah.
Yep, that is exactly it. So I just needed to bring it back to the teacher, because I know that if we help teachers and we help educators and we help student teachers, that trickle down will help students. And I'm in this to help other people. My dharma is to help people learn and help people have a better life. So that's where I'm coming from. The selling of the technology bit, no, I could care less. Does not matter to me. But if it helps somebody, yes, absolutely on board. I'll do whatever I can. I'll go that.
Does it extra mile, extra hour, extra week on a thing, or whatever the case may be? Totally, man. That's once you can answer the why to students.
Yes,
it was a lot easier. Any circumstance I've ever been in, as long as it makes a certain amount of sense relative to the learning outcomes and relative to what the group's interests and abilities are. If you can kind of rationalize it on those fronts, then chances are you're going to be doing okay. But if you just start kind of going willy-nilly down a path of implementation without any kind of census building or any kind of conceptual clarity relative to what others are doing in the area, you're really just kind of asking for a process that's going to be somewhat of a slog, right? And it kind of puts the risk of your credibility as an educator in the balance even a bit. If you're kind of just seen as being capricious, you're seen as being somebody who is sort of willing to kind of bring something forward and into the environment and just kind of push it forward regardless of what others are thinking. Again, innovation failure, right? Things we talked at length not that long ago, as in less than an hour ago, about what conditions are conducive to true innovation. The other side of that is, wow, there's just so much that isn't, so much lived experience that we could both refer to, I think, that's gotten in the way of a perfectly good idea being realized, right?
Yeah, absolutely. What's the structure in place? I remember a great quote by Galileo, who said, I don't believe God gave me this mind and then expects me not to use it. And I thought that was a great quote. It could be a mashup of stuff that he said, but the concept is very true. Get me on board, and then I'm on board.
Yeah.
I'm with you. But
telling
me do it because I said doesn't work.
I got a whiff of Marcus Aurelius's kind of rational guiding principle there, right? If you can bring your full analytical and rational capability to a thing, sort of break things down, sort of see the causes for what they are, and then make an assessment after reviewing it with a good amount of time and a good amount of discretion, never rush a decision. Never. If you have to rush a decision, then chances are it's not going to be a good decision. And the same is true at the grocery store, as it is in picking the person on Tinder you want to go on a date with, as it is like procuring, $1/5 million in hardware or software for your learning tech department. It's the rush decisions. It's a recipe for failure most of the time. Right? So
absolutely. Now, what I want to do is jump to a 2004 article by Romanowski, and it's How's the E-Learning, Baby? Factors that lead to success and failure of EdTech innovation. And I like the title. It just made me feel good. How's the E-Learning, Baby? But they start with a quote from John Dewey from 1920. which so I had to double dip. It was education is the area of enterprise that suffers the most from the baby in the bathwater syndrome. And they adapted that from Dewey. And yeah, education is the most likely to say, yeah, dump it, get rid of whatever. Oh, we've been doing that. No, we got this new thing, make the other stuff go away. It's like, ugh. So
really glad to see Dewey here. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And they have a fantastic concept. They had a bunch of great graphics, and I could only pick the one. I didn't want to pick 3 or 4 because it's like, well, people can go read the article, right? You can go to Google Scholar and find this article. It's free.
This is lit. I love this diagram. I was just waiting for you to bring out this diagram. I love the terminology that goes with it. I love the adaptation from Rogers. Boy, oh boy. Lots to love about this little unassuming diagram here, pal. You want to unpack that for us a bit?
Sure. When we talk about failure and we talk about innovation, we're still, the parameters we put around it don't always work. Like if we used to do something, okay, does that work? Does that still work now? And this is like the second half of a bell curve. We start up at the top and then we gradually go down. And it's that discontinuance because, we got a new thing. And when the new thing takes over, people stop using the old thing, whatever the old thing was or whatever the old process or practice was. And just to see it just dribble off is so nice. And I never would have found this if we didn't have this podcast and we weren't taking a look at this concept. And just to see the second half, people don't talk about the second half of the bell curve a whole lot. They normally, it's like, here's how we picked it up. Here's how we measure the innovation because look at where we got to. Yeah, until when? How long is that tracking going? What's the longitudinal component of that? And it was so nice to see the opposite of Rogers diffusion, right? Because Rogers is all about, okay, here's how it works, here's how long it takes, here's what's going on. And I love Rogers diffusion of innovation. And to see the backside of it.
I'm literally, just as you were kind of making that point, I Googled in like for the image, right? For the diffusion of innovation parabola, or whatever that is, the bell curve as you described it. And I love, I've enjoyed, I've seen the utility of this diagram for some time, the diffusion of innovations. I've been aware of this since I was doing my doctoral work, and seeing somebody sort of go, well, what's what's not necessarily opposite of that, but what's a sort of complementary concept to describe the opposite of innovation? Discontinuance. That is dope. That is highly lit. I dig that a lot for various reasons, most of which I can't even necessarily articulate terribly well. But this is good stuff here, my friend.
And that's why I picked this article, because I like that chart, and discontinuance was such a nice word, which I don't think we've ever said before.
Really, I think that's a category of metadata for the thing, if it isn't already now. That's like a category for the show, not even a phrase, but like an actual category in the metadata, for sure. That's a good one, man.
Okay. I can make that part of the metadata. No worries. I have the power.
Well, I'm telling you, I came into teaching right around the beginning of Google Docs. I remember being in my first college teaching experience in 2008 and just being aware of like this new application, collaborative docs, that it was my first experience using things that way. I had used wikis, which were like more an asynchronous kind of a document kind of build thing, pretty just to some degree. But once I realized you could actually build a document with students in real time and have them make changes and all this stuff, that was one of those things that just twigged in my mind, like, wow, as an English teacher, as any kind of educator going in any kind of space right now, this is just cool stuff that I can see tons of teaching and education use for, and much more so the personal stuff. My thinking always like, this is going to up my teaching game. My whatever personal stuff outside my work, like, meh, whatever. It didn't really land. It didn't really do anything. But wow, when I got 3 students into one document in my classroom, like my first or second semester teaching college whatsoever, that was one of those moments where I went, okay, this is something that bears investigation within my career. This is where the tech actually becomes a thing that I can countenance, right? Or
Yes.
want to get involved in. And the fact that we're using this as like an integral function 15, 16 years after I even got started with that stuff, in such a crucial, fundamental way to our process. I mean, again, did it change the world? Is it different? Is it a new way to slice bread? Well, you ask the normal person out there, probably not. But for those who are impacted by just these little things, like, wow, I mean, it's difficult to imagine my trajectory as an educator without some of this stuff, actually. So,
Yeah.
Again, Matt, kind of a bit of a digression there, I think. I don't really connected that to the reading or what we're talking about per se, but kind of an observation, I suppose.
It is absolutely perfect for the rest of the Romazowski article, because they take electronic learning management needs as 4 categories for innovation in education. And your example just put the learning first. And so if the learning comes before the electronic or management or needs, you have students and teachers and materials. And what that leads to is knowledge sharing and skills mastery, which is what we want. That's what we've been talking about for 3 years. If you put the electronic first, technology is the answer. What's the question? If you put the needs first, is your project really necessary? And if you put the management first, it's not what you do, but the way you do it. And that what gets results. But are the results what we want? Is the results helping the students? Like, so your example, even though it was before we talked about the rest of that article, was the exact perfect example for what Romazowski talked about in the article.
Awesome.
So I assume you just scrolled a little bit down on the shared document and saw that next chunk and were illustrating that for me. So thank you for that.
Well, it's my pleasure to see, again, such high quality references making their way into the Google Doc. Because gosh knows a Google Doc is only as good as the stuff you put in it. Collaboration aside, if you're all just going A, B, C, D, E, F, G, then I mean, you don't need any kind of collaborative technology to just get some nonsense down. So again, much appreciation here for the highly lit and highly valid professional and academic references here, my friend.
Thanks. I do try. And I read a lot of stuff we don't talk about because it's like, oh, I can't figure out how to talk about this and tie it together in a cohesive way.
And on my end, I mean, I could have told you about how I had to reinstall Camtasia and do all this stuff and, on the way to getting the episodes out the door that made it cause 2 to 3 weeks or whatever.
Oh yeah.
But it's like skunk works, in each their own kind of area. You kind of just have to, that's what it's like. For every hour you spend at a task, right, you're only going to get a certain amount of achievable deliverable out of it. And if your whole focus is just on, well, so do I throw out the process because it took so long just to reach, the one viable product? Like, no, you change the process, you scale it, you don't throw it out. It becomes the baby or the bathwater. Dewey's baby and Dewey's bathwater, to a degree. And again, like when I'm thinking Dewey, I have to go back to when I was at University of Calgary. in the seminar, the first year that I did my 2-year, the 2 residences. In the first one, particularly, I had Randy Garrison, Garrison of Community of Inquiry kind of fame.
Yep.
And he's kind of the person who really got me onto COI as kind of a thing I was going to spend a lot of time with. And again, he really made it clear from in our discussions in that seminar, he's like, pretty much everything I've got informing this stuff goes back to Dewey. And okay, good to know. I've always kind of had it in my ear since then. So again, man, I'm glad to see how this stuff all kind of interrelates between and among itself, quite frankly.
Yeah, and I'm a sucker for classics are classics for a reason. Right? There's plenty of books that are published that I'm never going to. I love the concept of the classics, and Dewey's one of the classics in our field. So
exactly so. Right up there with Freire and all these other folks who we kind of keep touching on as we go, right?
Yeah.
Cool beans, man. So are we ready to proceed to Terras, Sorayanta, Terras, and Korcher, 2020?
Yes. They wrote an article, which I loved, because it's about post-COVID-19 education and education technology solutionism. And I love the word solutionism, because that opens up all kinds of possibilities, all kinds of what are we doing here?
Speaking of innovation failure, right? Solutionism.
Yes.
What is okay? So what is conducive to innovation? What we were talking about before. If we wanted to set ourselves up ideally to fail, right? If failure was our goal, if innovation failure was our goal, then solutionism would surely be a shortcut towards such failure, if I can read that right. So again, any insights you got, closer reading you've done to this, my friend, would be most welcome.
I grabbed 2 passages out of this that I just love, because they're talking about long before the pandemic. And I go back like 130, 150 years in the literature sometimes, but they're talking. Yeah, what was the last one? 1872 from the last episode that I went back to. But
Dr. Reed is a history major back in the day, so FYI.
My first academic love was history, yes, but I couldn't figure out how to get paid, so I became an educator. It's one of those things.
No shame, no harm, no foul, man.
So they talk about, in this article, Terras et al. Talks about critical researchers have noted the discrepancy between promises and improvements brought on by education technology. And that is bang on. They have hit the target with that. That is so true. Because that's the snake oil salesman selling whatever, right? It's here's the panacea for all your woes.
Panacea. You use panacea in a sentence. Bring it.
And I used it right.
That's
I'm pretty sure I used it correctly, so I'm even happier with that.
That is tight, my friend. Credit where credit's due.
Thanks. So that's what we got. We have the sales pitch, the snake oil salesman, the whatever, the people coming through with the traveling cart with this will improve your lives, whatever it happens to be.
Come on, it cures the gout, it'll fix your warts. You got mumps, you got bad breath, you want to last longer in bed, this is the stuff, you betcha. Yeah, totally. Solutionism like a motherfucker.
That's it.
Pardon me.
Well, yeah. So then they talk about the catchphrase and a utopia has been presented over decades, if not centuries, that technology is going to somehow disrupt or revolutionize education. We've been hearing about this
bullet kind of notion not that long ago on the show, right? Tap a werewolf with that. You got a problem, don't matter what it is. You load the tech in the chamber, it'll slow it down or put it in a wheelchair or some variety thereof, right?
Yes. A previous article talked about magic by technology, which is a nice juxtaposition, right? It's like magically all this is going to get fixed by the technology, even though magic and technology people see as 2 different things. So it's
and a whole bunch of people voted for Donald Trump, right?
so I don't even want to get into that.
Let's not. I just. But if you're talking about innovation failure, if you're talking about like, a guy who literally led people to the steps of the Capitol and had them go inside and commit acts of violence, and that guy is still even allowed to be on a ballot to be in charge of a thing, never mind being in charge of the thing. Like, good Lord. I mean, checks and balances. I mean, you can fuck right off with that nonsense, America. You don't get to talk about checks and balances anymore to any of us because we're laughing at you. Okay, there. Sorry.
Yeah.
Venting,
You got it right.
venting, and yet, right?
So with the Terrace et al. Article, I just loved that they called a spade and said, critical researchers have noted. And I love that phrase too, that turn of phrase, because sometimes it's just people going along because they need another article published. And they're tired of it too, thank goodness. And let's hope that this article gets looked at by decision makers to say, okay, it's the technology is not going to solve everything. It just isn't. And it's not meant to, because you got to ask the right questions first.
And you got to have trained personnel, and you got to provide resources and opportunity for people to actually get comfortable enough and try enough stuff that doesn't work to reach the point where you try something that it finally does work. But you need a whole lot of lead time, and you need to burn a whole lot of hours and material to get penicillin for some shit, right?
Yeah. And that's why, like, even our first article, the Wild article, the whys and the whats need to be done first.
100%.
And so you might see a cyclical theme in the research that I found when it starts talking about innovation and especially the failures.
If you're cherry picking to suit the mandate of the show, then I'm there for it, Matt. I'm not going to prejudge finding legit resources that align with what we're saying. We're it's despite the nature of the show, right? Despite the sort of what things we're throwing as being an informal and whatever kind of enterprise, which for sure it is. But I mean, we both had decades in before we started with this stuff. We both have spent so much time in the saddle, so to speak, so much time in the chair, so much time in front of the room that we can ad lib. We can kind of make these sort of riffs because it's coming back from a position of hard-won academic and intellectual discipline. Yeah. And I think anybody who actually watches the show is going to be hip to that, because everybody who's actually serious in this field knows that there's so much friggin' sweat equity that goes into what is ostensibly just being at the front of the room in the first place and knowing what the hell you're talking about. It actually takes a long time to get even comfortable with yourself in front of the room, never mind with your subject matter knowledge. So
exactly.
Again, for those who are sort of looking at this like, well, what are these guys even about? I would say that we are actually kind of moving things forward in ways that we would sort of have others do as well if they were so inclined. And when you can sort of align with the how you're doing with why you're doing, which I think we have since we were out of the gate with this stuff, then I think you're in a better position to have credibility. And that, because credibility is what I'm finding in the front of the classroom now for the first time in a while, is crucial to establishing trust. You have to have credibility as an educator. You have to show respect on a day-to-day level. You have to engage with students as humans first, and then as entities to be educated well distant to the first instance of just recognizing their personhood and getting as close to that with your educational methods as you can. I don't know where that came from, man. I'm just kind of pulling it out of my ear at this point, but that's kind of something noticing off the refs.
for people that are listening to us, we've been doing this for 3 years. That has been our slant and our perspective and our bias since we started. I can't see it
Sure.
changing. that's
Well, 2.5 since we started, and 6 months of kind of getting ready to start, for sure. Yeah, it's a 3-year endeavor at this point.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
I see this as season 3. I don't. It's just, it is what it is. It's still fun. So
it's becoming greater than the sum of its parts, and I'm happy for it. Wouldn't want it any other way, man.
So I found this fantastic article from India.
Okay.
And it's Chand, Deshmukh, and Shukla, and it's why does technology integration fail? And so it was really neat. They're talking about teacher beliefs, and they're talking about content assumptions, because content creator presumptions, because those are two different things, right? Like,
okay.
When I was a classroom teacher, I was teaching social studies, and the teacher next to me, I don't know where she got the money, but she would go to those teacher stores and buy everything. Like,
okay,
there was a wall of like pre-built material with here's 87 Blackline Masters for this, or here's a whole pile of preset whatevers for this topic, and here's a whole bunch of activities for that, and they're all nicely done and stapled and with the nice covers, and each one of them cost like $20 or $30 or whatever it cost. She had so much stuff, it was crazy. And she said, "Oh, you're doing a lesson on whatever, here, try this." And it was a booklet that had like, 48 pages in it. And there was a lot of cool stuff in there. And it's like, yeah, but I can't do this because that doesn't work the way I work. And I can't do that. Oh, this one I can modify enough to make work. All good ideas. And I'm sure other people could use them, but I couldn't, because this isn't the way I taught. This isn't where I was going to reach those objectives. And this Chand et al. Article is talking about that. Is talking about how teachers respond to externally generated content, because it's content that's not mine. It's coming from somehow. So that's, I bought it, or somebody else loaned it to me, or the administrator said you got to teach this, or whatever the deal. Anything not me. And they talk about how teacher beliefs and practices influence how the technology integration is going to happen, and what the outcome is going to be. It just is. Without the teachers on board, fully on board with the skills, forget it. Forget it. It's not happening.
And so then again, it's just, there's so much where you could sort of quantify it, where you could say, in advance of bringing out this sort of system-wide innovation or technological change or whatever, let's actually run a project management process on it, figure out how quantity-wise many hours need to be there for somebody to feel like they got self-efficacy with the thing. Then, once the staff actually has self-efficacy with it, then, bring it out to the students. Make sure that this, don't just do training in such a way that, you have a level of mastery in your educator cohort before they try to bring the thing out to students. Right now, it's sort of, well, here's the thing. You got your 1.5 hour lunch and learn on it, or whatever you can scrape together in your office. It's going live in 2 weeks with the students. You better get used to it. You better figure it out. Kind of a different approach, right?
Yeah. And what drives me bonkers is when we now have, I've got a span here of 28 years worth of literature saying the people doing the teaching matter the most.
Yes.
They have to be prepared. They need the whys and the whats, not just the hows. They need all the answers. It has to be thought about. It's 30, 29, 28 years later. We're still getting new publications saying it's not happening. So that failure is systemic. It absolutely is. So is it an ed leadership failure then? Yeah. Is it a failure of leadership? Is it a systemic failure? Like, I know a bunch of educational leaders that want nothing but the best, and they work their rear ends off to make it happen. But there's others that are climbers. They're trying to get that nicer office, or there's others that are doing it for the money. Whatever the reason is, I don't know why it's 30 years later and we're still publishing the same stuff. How many times does it need to be published and need to be said before the system starts to say, oh, okay, so who holds our feet to the fire for that?
You're kind of making an assumption here, though, that just because something, I always find it interesting that so much emphasis is placed on within the academic cohort, right, within professors or teachers, that you got to have you got to be current, you got to be publishing, you got to be active at the front line of your academic discipline as well as doing your teaching. And that's fine. I mean, that's kind of part of the gig. But then when it comes to making data-informed decisions about how an institution is going to spend its resources or bring in, quote unquote, new or innovative practices, they're going to take 6 peer-reviewed articles and shrink them each down to 1.5 bullet points, and it's going to make its way into one email that goes in front of a assistant VP or associate VP who's going to sign off on something that's being advocated for by other stakeholders within the institution who have most assuredly not looked at any level of the literature or practical literature, even a bit, relative to what even an undergraduate student would need to do if they were doing a lit review in a class. We expect more of undergraduates in terms of their ability to find some sources, integrate the sources, make an argument, defend your argument using those sources. That's what I'm doing with first-year university class students right now. And I can assure you that that is way, way more of an investigation from an academic standpoint and into the literature than what whoever signs off on major procurement decisions is going to go through when determining if such a thing is even necessary.
Yeah. So let's change that system. The leaders I know, they work hard and they care.
Yep.
So why is the system set up that they don't have time to do what's actually important that helps impact students and helps impact success? They're doing this. I know somebody right now. I was chatting with them, and they're like, "Oh, got to go to a meeting," and it's not at my work. It's outside my current work.
Yep.
And I'm like, "Oh, you got a meeting? I didn't know." It's like, yeah, one of those paint dry meetings. And it's like, but you're a leader. And it's like, oh yeah, they dragged all of us in. Across the institution, like every leader of a certain level gets brought into these meetings, and it's watch them paint dry over and over and over again. And it's like, that cannot be a good use of anybody's time. There has to be a better way. And it's that impact, right? I'm not begging on leaders. I've been a leader. I know how much work it is.
I'm begging on leaders, haven't been, and kind of. I spent some time, but yeah, go ahead.
No, and I see a difference. I don't beg on leaders, but I will beg on bosses. Right? Because
nice.
I see leader and a boss as two different things. Maybe that should be an episode.
I revised my statement.
The leaders I know.
Leaders.
Yeah. Leader is a mindset and a way to act and a way to be, and boss is a job or a job title. Okay. I see those as two different things. Yeah, maybe we get into that later.
I'm willing to step back from my initial position of abusing the word leader. Okay, that's dope. Yeah. Appreciate the insights, my friend.
No worries. No worries. That's how I take it. I could be wrong. Nope.
I am completely there for it, and I think it warrants further investigation, actually. But
okay. we have one
Yeah,
more
man.
article. Sancho Gil,
Okay.
Riviera Vargas, and Mino Puxeros, moving beyond the predictable failure of EdTech innovations. And I just loved that title. That title
That's a good
sucked
title.
me in. It's like,
A predictable
yes,
failure.
we know it's a predictable failure, but even with failure, whoever's doing the research is getting another line or two in their resume, right? Their CV has an extra couple of publications that year, so congratulations. And one thing they do is they talk about the overly narrow framing of digital technology as the crucial element in persistent failure of the majority of EdTech. EdTech does not need to be just electronic or just digital or just ICT. That is not what we're doing here. But somehow that has somehow taken all the air out of the room.
It's reductionist thinking. It's sort of technological determinism. It's like there's going to be a technological quote unquote solution to this, and we're going to find literature or opinions that support that predetermined outcome because we only got a knife and a hammer and a screwdriver in our kit, and so it's got to be one of these, right? It's got to be one of these particular things. There's no talk of let's expand the paradigm, let's reconsider what we're even let's look at our foundational assumptions and see if they're sound. Let's do a wide-ranging kind of evaluation according to processes that align with good teaching and learning instead of simply procurement and such. Again, I talk about procurement like it's some sort of mystical entity that I don't know that much about. And maybe if I spend some time on that side of it, within my career, who knows what the future holds. But again, it just kind of speaks to, as we've been on about since the beginning of the show, all the money and all the technology magic it can throw at a thing isn't going to make up for bad pedagogy. It's not going to make up for poor teaching. It's not going to make up for too many students in a room, not getting enough of one individual teacher's instructional time or whatever. It all kind of comes back to the same sort of very human and very predictable hangups. So and that's just such an awesome title for an article, man.
Yeah, I love it. And they wrap up what they're saying, and they basically are on the same path we're on, right? The students come first, the learning comes first, the educator comes, and the technology is not the critical piece. The critical piece is not whatever that piece of technology is. It's the student learning. That's the critical piece.
Yeah.
So I just really like the way they phrased it, and the title was just I can hear the sigh, like when you read that out loud, right? They should have had a comma sigh, or at the end of it they should have had in brackets sigh, right? Moving beyond the predictable failure of EdTech initiatives.
Moving beyond the predictable failure of EdTech initiatives. Haven't we all been, right? Relatable. Like from inside the Supercollider, it seems pretty obvious. But if you're somebody who is in a position at a university or a college or whatever, that's never actually had an interaction of an instructional nature with a student. If you are a boss who has been so far out of your teaching years that, okay, are you the right person in and about stuff that affects people on a day-to-day, moment-by-moment level? Maybe, maybe not.
Right on. So those are my articles that I came up with.
Oh, love them.
And if the listeners go to the website, analog-trope.com/podcast or oyos.ca/ent, they can take a look at these notes and take a look at some of my digital clutter.
There's some good ones there.
I love. One of them is more about like corporate innovation failure, but it still made me
Okay.
feel good. And it was the Bizarro article or the Bizarro comic. It's like, I wouldn't say the ship is sinking, but the mast is broken. We're out of food and water. Sharks are circling. The captain's insane. It's just, yep, there we
I
go.
don't mean to be hyperbolic. However, please allow me to describe the sharks' fins as I see them getting closer. Yeah. That's good.
How many times have I been in a staff meeting and it's like, yep, the captain's nuts. Like I'm sitting there saying, oh no. Right? Not all the time. I've worked for some nice leaders, but I have definitely had some people that's like, man, you are disconnected from reality if you think this is going to happen.
I am holding my tongue because I've got 2 or 3 specific names from one pretty much specific place. And wow, I hear you. That delineation between bosses and leaders is going to be very, very helpful going down the stretch for me in terms of how I even think about my whole past, trajectory with some of this stuff. So good on you, my man.
Thanks. So I have another couple of pictures. If there's any you want to talk about, I'm happy to share my understandings for why I shared them. But for the readers, some of them are quite cute.
I always see Gilbert. It's what do you call it? Acme Aerospace image here.
Yeah.
That's.
So what this is from like the Coyote and the Roadrunner, and the Coyote's got a hold of a rocket and they're holding on, and the little thing is aim higher, like those inspirational posters. But that technology is not helping what actually needs. He's trying to catch the Roadrunner. For some reason, he's now above the sky and he's holding on for dear life. Like the technology is not doing what he needed it to do or what he wanted it to do. It did not solve his problem.
I'm
so there's a couple
Elon Musk for some reason, but yeah, man.
Okay, so I got 3 more things. The word, question, and phrase of the podcast.
Yes.
Word of the podcast is discontinuance, because we both like that so much.
Dope.
Question of the podcast is, what is a measurement for success in EdTech innovations? And that's something that needs to happen so that we know what we're measured against before we start. We just do.
Yeah.
If you don't know, if you're not measuring it, how do you know when you get there? How do you know what to aim for? How do you do whatever? And I cheated. I have 2 phrases of the podcast. One is innovation failure from the title.
Yep.
And the other one is pretty much everything I got goes back to Dewey. And I really like how that phrase got spun, because I'm a big fan of Randy Garrison's work.
I'm willing to stand by that précis or paraphrase or summary of what Dr. Garrison had to say in that meeting room. So if somehow he has any interest or ability to check this out, I would say thanks for everything, Dr. Garrison, and also plus we got some pretty good mileage out of it for this episode and others. I got to really anytime we get a chance to check in with Dewey, then dare we or dare we not? I'd say we do dare. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, man.
Absolutely. So that's all I've got.
Well, that's all we got for now.
Oh, yeah.
And
I'm going to go.
I have certainly enjoyed catch the rest of a football game.
That's exactly where I'm headed.
I got 30 minutes before I record the music podcast. So,
whoa, you're a busy guy.
Yeah, man. It's something to do. It's just something earlier for me than it is for you. So don't forget.
True enough.
So to that end, yeah. totally, right? I'm only in the early evening. I'm where it is now when we first started this thing. That's how much time has gone by. So I'm just going to say, yeah, been a slice. Thanks as ever for checking out the show, whoever you are and whyever you are and however. And we'll catch you the next time on the other side of the Supercollider. Take care.
Bye, everybody.